Late at night, the large office building stood quiet, with only a few lights glowing across the empty halls. Most employees had already gone home, their desks locked and computers turned off. The silence was broken only by the faint sound of a mop moving across the shiny marble floor. The janitor worked slowly, carefully cleaning each corner, his back bent from long hours of labor. His uniform was worn out, his shoes tired, but his eyes carried a strength that came from years of struggle. He did not complain. He simply worked, because he knew his family depended on him. The billionaire's daughter had stayed late that evening, something unusual for her. She had been helping with some charity event paperwork in her father's company office. As she walked out of her father's glass cabin, she noticed him for the first time. She had seen janitors before, of course, but she never paid much attention. This time was different. She paused near the stairway, quietly watching him. His movements were steady, his expression calm, and there was a certain pride in the way he did his job, as though even cleaning the floor mattered. She had grown up in a world of luxury. From childhood, she was surrounded by servants, chauffeurs, private schools, and expensive vacations. She never had to think twice before asking for something. Everything was handed to her. But watching this man scrubbing the floor, she felt a strange mix of curiosity and discomfort. Why did someone have to work so hard for things she took for granted? Why did he look so serious, as if carrying the weight of the world while she lived so freely? She stepped closer, her heels tapping softly against the floor. The janitor looked up, surprised to see the young woman standing there. For a moment, he froze, unsure if he should greet her or return to his work. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve, nodded politely, and went back to mopping. She realized he was nervous, maybe even embarrassed, as if he feared being judged. That reaction alone made her heart twist a little. "Hi," she said softly. Her voice echoed in the empty hallway. The janitor lifted his eyes again, unsure of what to say. Very few people spoke to him, especially not the boss's daughter. "You work late?" she asked. "Yes, miss," he answered in a low, respectful voice. Every night, she smiled faintly. "Don't you get tired?" The janitor hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Tired? Yes. But I have no choice. I must keep going. My family needs me." Those words stuck in her mind. Family needs me. She had never worked a day in her life to support her family. Her father's billions covered everything. Yet here was this man, probably earning just enough to survive, sacrificing his body and health for the people he loved. She felt a pang of guilt, though she did not show it. They stood in silence for a moment. The daughter wanted to ask more questions, but wasn't sure how. She didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable. Still, she sensed that behind his tired face. There was a story worth knowing. She noticed his hands rough, calloused, marked by years of hard work. She thought of her own hands, smooth and soft, used to holding expensive phones and handbags. The contrast between their worlds could not have been sharper. Yet something about this meeting made her feel connected to him in an unexpected way. The janitor returned to his work, dipping the mop in the bucket, wringing out the water, then pressing it against the floor. She watched him for a few more seconds, realizing that this man was invisible to everyone else. People walked past him every day without noticing. But tonight, she noticed. For the first time, she wondered what his life was like after he left the building, where he went, what kind of home he lived in, and what dreams he might secretly hold. She finally said, "You do a good job. The floor always looks so clean." It was a simple compliment, but the janitor's eyes softened. He gave her a small smile, one that seemed rare, as though no one had told him that in a very long time. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly. Something changed in that instant. The daughter realized that her words carried weight. To her, it was just kindness. To him, it was recognition, something that lifted his tired spirit. She walked away a few minutes later, but her mind stayed on that moment. She kept replaying the way his face had lit up with a single word of appreciation. That night, as she left the office and stepped into her luxury car waiting outside, she glanced back at the tall building. Somewhere inside, the janitor was still working, unseen by most, but unforgettable to her now. She didn't know it yet, but this small meeting was the beginning of something that would change her life. Her father's pride and the janitor's future forever. The next day. The billionaire's daughter could not stop thinking about the janitor she had met the night before. His words kept replaying in her mind. "My family needs me." They were so simple, yet heavy with meaning. She realized she knew almost nothing about his life. For her family meant dinners in marble halls, drivers waiting outside, and credit cards for every need. For him, family meant endless hours of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice. That evening, she purposely stayed late again. She wanted to see him. She told herself it was curiosity, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. She wanted to understand his world. And when she saw him again, bent over with his mop and bucket, she felt the same quiet pull as before. This time, she started a longer conversation. She asked his name. He hesitated at first, but then replied, "David." She smiled and told him hers. Slowly, he relaxed. Though he still spoke with the respect and caution of a man who knew the gap between their worlds. Bit by bit, she asked about his life. David explained how he had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, but life had been cruel. His father passed away when he was young, and as the eldest, he had to take responsibility for his younger siblings. Education slipped away from him as he worked small jobs to keep food on the table. Later, he married and had 2 children of his own. Life became even harder. His daughter was bright, talented in school, but tuition fees were rising, and he could barely afford books. His son had asthma, which meant regular visits to the clinic. Every paycheck vanished before the month even ended. The daughter listened, her heart heavy. Each detail felt like a stab of truth she had never considered before. She had grown up shielded from reality. When she wanted new shoes, they appeared in her closet. When she wanted to study abroad, her father signed a check. Yet here was a man, just 1 floor below her father's shining office, who had to choose between his children's medicine and their school books. She asked softly, "Do you ever rest?" David gave a tired laugh. "Rest? Maybe a few hours at night. I work here until midnight. Then, in the morning, I take odd repair jobs in the neighborhood. On weekends, I help at a car wash. Rest is a luxury I cannot afford." The words struck her deeply. She had never even thought of rest as a luxury. For her, it was a given. For him, it was a dream. Over the next few nights, she kept talking to him, and he began to trust her more. She learned how often he faced insults from others. Some people looked down on him, not even making eye contact as he worked. Many acted as if he were invisible, a shadow that existed only to clean up after them. He never complained. Instead, he swallowed his pride and kept working because he had no choice. The daughter began to feel both anger and sadness. How could society be so blind to people like David? Why was dignity measured by money? She thought of her father's business meetings, where men in expensive suits talked about profit margins and luxury projects, while people like David went unnoticed right outside their glass walls. One night as they spoke, she noticed his shoes. They were worn thin, the soles almost gone. It hurt her to see how he walked miles in those shoes, yet never asked for help. She remembered her own closet, full of unused pairs, and guilt burned inside her. David shared another detail that stayed with her. He said, "Sometimes my daughter asks me why we don't live like other families. She sees her classmates with new uniforms, shiny bags, and fancy lunches. I tell her, One day, with God's help, things will change. But deep down, I fear I might not be able to give her the life she deserves." The daughter felt her throat tighten. She could imagine his little girl asking that question and his helplessness in answering it. She thought about her own father. He had billions. He could change David's entire life with the stroke of a pen. Yet he never noticed the man who kept his offices shining that as days passed, her bond with David grew quietly. She never treated him as just a janitor. She treated him as a human being with dignity, dreams, and struggles. Sometimes she would bring him tea, surprising him. Sometimes she just sat nearby and listened. She began to understand that his story was not unique. There were thousands like him, unseen and unheard, carrying the burden of society on their shoulders. But she also knew one thing. She could not remain a silent observer anymore. His struggle had opened her eyes. It was no longer just curiosity. It was responsibility. She wanted to help. What she didn't realize was that her growing friendship with David was not invisible. The cameras in the building, the watchful eyes of staff, and the whispers of employees had already started spreading. It was only a matter of time before her father, the powerful billionaire, would discover what was happening. And when he did, everything would change. The night was quiet again when she walked into the office corridor. David was there, as usual, with his mop and bucket. His shoulders looked heavier than before, and his face showed signs of exhaustion. She greeted him, and he gave her a tired but polite smile. Something about his expression that evening bothered her. She decided to ask. "You look worried," she said softly. David tried to wave it off. But she pressed gently, and at last he admitted the truth. His daughter's school had sent a notice. If the fees were not paid by the end of the week, she would not be allowed to sit in her exams. He had tried to collect extra shifts, even borrowed from neighbors, but he was still short. His voice shook a little as he confessed it. For a man of pride, admitting weakness was not easy. The billionaire's daughter felt her chest tighten. She could almost see the little girl full of dreams, now at risk of losing them because of something as simple as money. For her, the cost of those school fees was nothing. It was equal to what she spent on a single dinner at a luxury restaurant. Yet for David, it was a mountain he could not climb. She hesitated. She knew if her father found out, he would be furious. He had strict rules about how she should behave, whom she should associate with. But in that moment, she didn't care. She only saw a father's desperation and a child's future hanging by a thread. The next day, she quietly went to the school and paid the fees herself. She did not tell David right away. She wanted it to be a surprise, a small act that might ease his burden without wounding his pride. That evening, when she returned to the office, she found him cleaning the stairway. She walked up to him with a calm smile and said, "Don't worry about your daughter's school. It's taken care of." David froze. He looked up at her, his eyes wide, unable to process what he had just heard. "Miss, what do you mean?" he asked slowly. She spoke gently. "I went to the school today. The fees are paid. Your daughter can take her exams." For a long moment, he stood in stunned silence. Then his eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. His lips trembled as he struggled to find the words. "Miss, I don't know what to say. Why would you do this?" "Because she deserves a chance," she said softly. "And because you deserve peace." David put down his mop and leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling quickly. It was the first time in years that someone had seen his struggle and done something about it. He had begged banks, pleaded with friends, worked himself to exhaustion, yet none of it had been enough. But here, with a single act, she had lifted a crushing weight from his shoulders. He finally whispered, "You don't know what you've done for me. For her, I can never repay you." She shook her head. "This isn't about repayment. It's about doing what's right. From that night, something changed between them. The bond that had started with small conversations now carried a deeper trust. David began to share more of his life with her. He spoke about his late nights walking home, the meals he sometimes skipped so his children could eat, the fear that one day his health would collapse before he could secure their future. She listened, truly listened, and every word sank into her heart. She realized how blind she had been all her life. Her world had been built on her father's empire, but she had never thought about the people who kept that empire running: the drivers, the cleaners, the cooks, the guards. They were the silent foundation of her comfort. Yet they remained unseen. Her act of kindness was small compared to what he carried, but it lit something inside her. She started bringing him simple, warm meals when he looked too tired, extra books for his children, even old jackets from her closet when winter came. At first, David resisted. His pride told him not to accept charity. But her sincerity broke through his hesitation. She never treated him as lesser. She treated him as equal, as a father doing everything he could for his family. One evening, after she gave him some books for his daughter, David said quietly, "Miss, no one has ever cared like this. Not my bosses, not the neighbors. Only you. Why?" She thought for a moment and replied, "Because kindness should not depend on class. You deserve it as much as anyone else." David lowered his head, his throat tight with emotion. He had spent years thinking he was invisible, just another janitor forgotten by the world. But her small acts reminded him that dignity could be restored. Even in little ways, what neither of them realized was that these acts were not invisible. The security guards noticed her visits. Some employees whispered when they saw her bringing food or sitting with him. Stories spread in quiet corners of the building. And like all whispers, they eventually reached the wrong ears. Soon her father would hear of it. And when he did, the world they had carefully built between them would be shaken by his reaction. Over the weeks, the daughter and David began to see each other not just as Billionaire's daughter and janitor, but as two people who shared conversations that mattered. What started with a small act of help had now grown into something deeper: a bond built on respect, kindness, and understanding. She often stayed late on purpose. Not because she had extra work, but because she wanted to sit in the quiet hallway and talk with him. Sometimes they spoke about his family. He told her about his little girl, how she loved drawing flowers on scraps of paper, how she dreamed of becoming a doctor someday. His face lit up when he talked about her. He also mentioned his son, whose asthma made him weak but never stopped him from chasing footballs with his friends. These stories painted a picture of love and struggle that touched her heart in ways she had never felt before. Other times, they talked about life itself. David shared wisdom that surprised her. He spoke about patience, about how pain teaches people to value joy, about how even in the darkest nights, a man must believe the sun will rise. These were not the words of a poor janitor. These were the words of a philosopher. Someone who had lived life so deeply that he carried truths many rich men never knew. She found herself opening up to. She confessed that even with all her wealth, she often felt lonely, surrounded by people, yet starved of honesty. Friends came for parties, clothes, or her father's name, but very few ever cared about who she really was. For the first time, she had someone who listened without judgment. Someone who spoke to her not as the billionaire's daughter, but as a human being. One evening, she brought him tea and sat on the stairs while he worked. They laughed about small things, like how the office dog barked only at certain people, or how the old elevator always groaned like an angry monster. Their laughter echoed through the empty halls, and in that moment, both of them felt lighter. But beneath the joy, there was always the shadow of risk. Every time she walked toward him, she knew someone might be watching. Every smile, every conversation could be misinterpreted. Yet she didn't care. For her, David was not staff. He was a man who deserved kindness, friendship, and dignity. David, however, carried a constant hesitation. He admired her kindness, but worried about how others would see it. He knew the power her father held. He knew that one word from the billionaire could destroy his job, maybe even blacklist him from ever working in the city again. But when she spoke to him with such warmth, his fears faded for a little while. He allowed himself to enjoy her presence, even though deep down he knew this bond could never remain hidden forever. One night, as they walked out together, she asked him a question that startled him. "Do you ever wish your children could live the life I live?" David looked at her carefully before answering. "No," he said. She frowned, surprised. He explained, "I don't wish for them to live a life of riches. I only wish for them to live with dignity. Money without dignity is empty. But dignity, even without money, can make life worth living." His words stayed with her long after she reached home. She replayed them again and again, realizing how true they were. For years, she had seen her father's worldmen chasing money, power, and deals, but losing themselves in arrogance. Maybe that's why she always felt something missing. David's words gave her a clarity that even her expensive education never did. As their bond grew, her small acts of help became natural. Sometimes she slipped money into envelopes for his children's books. Sometimes she left food boxes near his locker. He always tried to refuse, but she insisted, saying, "This is not charity. This is friendship." And slowly, David began to believe her. For the first time in many years, he felt seen. Not as a worker in the background, but as a man whose life mattered. But while their friendship grew in silence, whispers had begun spreading louder. Employees exchanged glances, security guards whispered during their shifts. And soon the story reached the ears of the billionaire himself. He did not hear it as a tale of kindness. He heard it as a scandalous daughter, lowering herself to mix with a janitor. His pride was wounded before he even knew the details. And when pride is wounded, anger is never far behind. The bond that had grown so carefully was about to be tested in the harshest way possible. The whispers reached him first. The billionaire was in his grand office, a place of glass walls, polished floors, and heavy silence. He had built his empire on control of money, control of people, control of every small detail around him. Nothing escaped his attention for long. That is why, when two senior managers hesitantly mentioned that his daughter had been spending too much time with a janitor, his calm broke like glass under pressure. At first, he didn't believe it. His daughter. Talking to a janitor. Impossible. She had been raised in wealth, sent to the best schools, taught to walk among people of her class. What could she possibly see in a man who mopped floors? Yet the manager's nervous glances told him it was true. And soon after, even the head of security confirmed that she often stayed late in the building, sitting with the janitor, talking, sometimes even sharing food. The billionaire's pride burned. To him, this was more than unusual, it was an insult. He imagined the headlines, the whispers at his social gatherings, rivals laughing at the idea that his daughter, the symbol of his legacy, was spending her nights with a man he considered far beneath them. His jaw clenched. He decided he needed to see this with his own eyes. That night, he arrived at the building earlier than usual, but kept himself hidden. From the shadows of his office balcony, he watched. And there she was, his daughter, seated on the stairs with a paper cup of tea, smiling at the janitor who leaned on his mop. She laughed at something he said, her voice echoing softly through the hall. It wasn't just politeness, it was warmth, comfort, familiarity. The billionaire's chest tightened, not with joy, but with fury. To him, this was betrayal. His daughter, who had everything, who could have chosen anyone from the richest families in the city, was wasting her time with a man who earned in a month what she spent in a day. He felt humiliated, even though no one else was watching. He stormed down the stairs, his footsteps heavy, sharp like thunder in the silent hall. Both David and his daughter looked up in shock. The laughter died instantly. The janitor straightened, dropping his mop, his face pale. The daughter froze, her eyes wide with fear. "What is this?" The billionaire's voice cracked like a whip. He glared at his daughter, then turned his cold eyes on David. "You? What do you think you're doing?" David lowered his head, his voice trembling but respectful. "Sir, I silence." The billionaire roared. "You dare sit with my daughter? You dare waste her time with your pathetic stories?" The daughter stood quickly, her voice shaking but strong. "Father, please. It's not what you think," but he cut her off. "Not what I think. You sit here, laughing with a janitor, as though you are equals. Do you understand what this looks like? Do you understand what people are saying?" Her face flushed with anger now. "I don't care what people say. He is a good man. He works harder than anyone in this building, harder than any of your so-called friends in suits." Her words shocked him more than the sight itself. His daughter defending a janitor. He turned his fury back on David. "Pack your things. You're finished here. Tomorrow you will never step foot in this building again." David's throat tightened. He wanted to beg, to explain that nothing improper had happened, that their bond was only kindness and respect. But his pride held him back. He stood silently, eyes lowered, his heart breaking not for himself but for his children who depended on this job. The daughter rushed forward. "No, you can't do that. He did nothing wrong." The billionaire's face hardened. He crossed a line. "And you?" He pointed a finger at her, trembling with rage. "You have embarrassed this family. You are my daughter, and you will not throw away your dignity on." On this, she shook her head fiercely, tears welling in her eyes. "Dignity? You think dignity is about money? He has more dignity in his calloused hands than in all the rich men you invite to our home. He works, he sacrifices, he doesn't hide behind lies. You call yourself powerful, but you don't even see the people who make your empire stand." The billionaire had no words for a moment. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not business rivals, not partners, not even his wife. His daughter's defiance cut him deeply. David, trembling, finally spoke. "Sir, please. Don't punish her for helping me. If you want, punish me, fire me. But don't be angry at her." His calm, humble words only deepened the tension. The billionaire's eyes flashed with contempt, but somewhere, deep inside, the smallest crack appeared in his pride. He had expected the janitor to beg for mercy. Instead, the man asked only for the daughter's protection. The hall was thick with silence. The daughter stood beside David, refusing to move. Her eyes locked with her father's. For the first time, the billionaire felt his control slipping. He turned sharply and walked away, his voice echoing behind him. "This is not the end. Tomorrow, we will settle this." And with that, he left them standing in the quiet hallway, one defiant daughter, and one terrified janitor whose life now hung by a thread. The discovery had broken open the secret bond. Now, everything rested on what the billionaire would do next. The night of discovery left the entire household in silence. The billionaire returned home, his face hard as stone, his steps sharp, echoing through the marble halls. His daughter followed behind him, her heart pounding, but she refused to show fear. They entered the grand living room, where chandeliers sparkled above and priceless paintings lined the walls. Everything around them screamed of wealth and power. But the air was heavy with tension. He turned to her, his voice low but fierce. "Explain yourself." She stood tall, though her hands trembled slightly. "There is nothing to explain. I talked to him. I helped him. That's all. Helped him." The billionaire scoffed, pacing the room like a lion in a cage. You call that help? You sat with him. You laughed with him. You gave him money behind my back? Do you have any idea what this looks like? Do you know the shame this brings to our name? Her voice broke through his anger. Shame? You think kindness is shame? You think noticing the pain of another human being is an insult to your empire? Father, don't you see? That man works harder than anyone in this building, yet he struggles just to keep his children in school. And you walk past him every day as if he doesn't exist. The billionaire's fists clenched. No one had ever spoken to him like this, especially not his daughter. You are blind, he snapped. You don't understand the world. There are classes, boundaries, rules that cannot be broken. We are not like them. We are above them. That is how this family survives. That is how my empire stands. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. No, Father. That's how your pride stands, not your empire. You think money makes you higher, but you don't see that dignity can exist without wealth. David has more honor cleaning those floors than some of the rich men who sit at your table and smile while plotting behind your back. The words struck him like a blade. He turned sharply, his face reddening with fury. You dare compare me to a janitor? She stepped forward. No, I dare to say he is better than you. Because he sacrifices for his family while you chase more and more power. He teaches his children hope while you teach me fear of what people will think. The room shook with the silence that followed. The billionaire's chest rose and fell heavily. For years, he had been the one to command, the one whose words ended every argument. But now, his daughter, his own flesh and blood, stood against him, refusing to bend. Finally, he shouted, Enough! Tomorrow, he is gone. He will never step into my company again. Do you hear me? Her tears spilled now, but her chin lifted in defiance. If he goes, I go too. The words stunned him. His heart skipped, his breath caught. He stared at her as if he had not heard correctly. What did you say? She repeated firmly. If you fire him, I will leave. I will walk out of this house and you will never see me again. Because I cannot live in a world where compassion is treated as betrayal. The billionaire staggered back, his hand gripping the edge of a chair. For the first time, he felt the fear of losing her, not to scandal, not to enemies, but to his own pride. His empire could crush rivals, silence critics, and buy power. But what use was any of it if his own daughter turned away from him? He tried to recover, his voice lower but still sharp. You don't understand. This world is cruel. If people see you like this, they will mock you. They will mock me. I have built a name that cannot be touched. She shook her head. A name without heart is nothing. Do you want people to fear you or respect you? Do you want to be remembered as a man who built buildings? Or a man who destroyed people? Her words pierced deeper than she knew. For a moment, the billionaire's mask cracked. He remembered his own childhood, the small village where his father had once worked as a clerk, the hunger they had felt, the humiliation of being looked down on by the wealthy. He had sworn then that he would rise so high no one could ever look down on him again, and he had succeeded. But in that rise, had he become the very man he once despised? His silence stretched. The daughter stood firm, tears on her cheeks, but fire in her eyes. The confrontation had reached its peak. Now a choice hung in the air between pride and love, between empire and compassion. The billionaire could cling to his old ways, or he could let this moment break the chains of arrogance he had carried all his life. And though he didn't speak it yet, the decision forming in his heart would shock them all. The house was silent after their confrontation. The billionaire spent most of the night pacing in his private study. A glass of untouched whiskey on the table, the city lights glowing through the tall windows. His daughter's words rang in his head again and again. If you fire him, I go too. He had built his empire on discipline, order, and unshakable pride. To him, kindness had always been a weakness, something to be hidden beneath power. But now, that power had been challenged, not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by his own daughter, the one person whose love he could not buy, whose loyalty he could not command. As the hours passed, memories from his past crept in. He remembered being young, poor, and humiliated. He remembered watching his mother patch the same pair of shoes for years. His father working late nights under cruel bosses who never once said thank you. He remembered the sting of being treated as invisible. The hunger that burned not just in his stomach, but in his pride. He realized, with a sinking heart, that he had become what he once hated, a man who stepped over others without seeing them by dawn. His decision was made. The next day, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. Employees whispered nervously, sensing the storm. David stood by the cleaning cart, his eyes heavy with fear. He had barely slept, expecting to be fired. Every glance toward the elevators made his chest tighten. He had already thought of what to tell his children, how to explain losing his job yet again. The billionaire's daughter stood nearby, her heart pounding. She was ready to fight again if she had to, ready to walk out of the empire she had grown up in. She would not abandon David, no matter the cost. The elevator doors opened. The billionaire stepped out, his suit perfect, his face unreadable. The room froze. He walked straight to David. The janitor braced himself, ready for the blow. But then, something unexpected happened. The billionaire stopped in front of him, his eyes hard but strangely calm. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence was unbearable. Then, in a voice steady but heavy with meaning, he asked, "How long have you worked here?" David hesitated, confused. 7 years, sir. And in those 7 years, how many times have you been late? David swallowed. Never, sir. The billionaire nodded slowly. And how many times have you asked for a raise or complained about your work? David shook his head. Never, sir. The daughter watched closely, her heart racing. Something was changing in her father's tone. The billionaire stepped closer. And yet, you've carried this building on your back. Night after night, floor after floor, unseen. You've given everything and taken nothing. Do you know what that means? David's eyes widened, unsure if this was some kind of cruel test. I don't know, sir. The billionaire took a deep breath. It means you've done more for this company than men who sit in offices with golden pens. It means you are worth more than I allowed myself to see. The room went silent. Employees who had gathered nearby stared in shock. The daughter's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. Then came the truly shocking part. The billionaire looked at David directly and said, "From today, you are no longer a janitor. I am promoting you to supervisor of maintenance staff. You will receive a proper salary, full benefits for your family. And your children's education expenses will be covered by this company." Gasps filled the hall. David's knees almost buckled. His lips trembled, words stuck in his throat. "Sir, I don't deserve." The billionaire raised a hand, stopping him. "You do? You have earned it more than anyone." And I was blind not to see it. The daughter's heart swelled. She had never seen her father like this vulnerable human, stripped of arrogance. It was as if the weight of years had finally lifted from him. David's eyes overflowed with tears. He bent his head, his voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you, sir. You have given my children a future." The billionaire turned to his daughter then. Their eyes met. For a moment, no words passed between them, but she understood. This was his way of telling her he had listened. That her defiance, her courage, had broken through the walls of his pride, and for the first time in many years, she stepped forward and embraced him. He did not resist. He held her tightly, as though he feared losing her forever. The shocking decision had been made not to destroy, but to uplift, not to fire, but to honor. And in that choice, the billionaire regained something money could never buy. His humanity. The days that followed were unlike anything the company had seen before. Word of the billionaire's decisions spread quickly, traveling from office to office, then beyond the walls of the building. Employees whispered in shock and admiration. Some could hardly believe it how a man once known for his pride and ruthless control had lifted a janitor into a position of dignity. Others felt humbled, realizing that they too had walked past David 100 times without a glance, never once considering the weight of his struggles. For David, life changed overnight. He was no longer the invisible man with a mop in his hands. He walked through the building with his head held higher, his children's futures finally secure. His daughter came home one afternoon clutching her schoolbooks with joy, saying, "Papa, I can study without fear now." His son, though still battling asthma, smiled brighter knowing his father carried less worry. At last, David's sacrifices bore fruit not because of luck, but because his dignity had finally been recognized. The billionaire's daughter, meanwhile, watched the transformation with quiet pride. She had not only helped a man in need, she had cracked open the iron walls around her father's heart. She knew the change would not happen overnight. Men like her father, who built their lives on pride, did not soften easily. But she had seen something shift inside him, something that could not be undone. The billionaire himself was quieter after that day. In his private moments, he often replayed the confrontation with his daughter. Her words had struck him like a mirror, forcing him to see what he had become. He had spent decades chasing wealth to escape the humiliation of poverty. But in the process, he had blinded himself to the humanity of those around him. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight of that blindness. One evening, he sat with his daughter on the balcony of their mansion. The city glittered below them, lights stretching endlessly across the horizon. For a long while, neither spoke. Then he broke the silence. "You were right," he said, his voice lower, almost hesitant. "Money can build towers, but it cannot build respect." I had forgotten that. She turned to him, surprised at his softness. "You didn't just give him a job, Father. You gave him dignity. That's worth more than money." He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the city. "Perhaps that is the real legacy I should leave behind. Not just buildings with my name, but lives touched by my actions." The words stunned her. For years, she had only known him as a man obsessed with power. Now, she was seeing him as something else, a man capable of reflection, of change. The lessons spread beyond their family, too. Other employees began to look differently at the staff they once ignored. The cleaners, guards, and drivers suddenly received greetings, small words of thanks, nods of acknowledgement. A ripple had been created, and it began to grow. David himself remained humble. Even with his new role, he never forgot where he came from. He continued to treat everyone with kindness, never letting pride harden him. And whenever he saw the billionaire's daughter, he smiled with gratitude, not just for what she had done, but for reminding him and her father that humanity was stronger than class. The billionaire changed, but in his own way. He still wore his tailored suits, still signed million-dollar deals, but there was a shift in his presence. He began asking questions about the lower staff, checking if their needs were met, ensuring that no one went unseen again. His pride was still there, but it had been reshaped. It was no longer pride in being above others, it was pride in being able to lift others. Years later, when people spoke of him, they did not only mention his empire or his wealth. They spoke of the day he shocked everyone by lifting a janitor, by choosing dignity over arrogance. That act became his true legacy. As for his daughter, she carried the lesson in her heart for the rest of her life, that a single act of compassion can shake the foundations of power. And that courage to stand against injustice even in your own home can change the course of lives. And David, the janitor who once worked in silence, became the living proof of that lesson. His story reminded everyone who heard it that no one is invisible, and that true greatness is not measured in money, but in the humanity you choose to show. The shocking act had turned into something greater than a moment of drama. It had become a lesson for a family, a company, and everyone who witnessed it. That dignity is the wealth no billionaire can buy, but every human being deserves.